So now that we've studied all the rules for multiplying integers, for example, negative times negative, positive times negative, positive times a positive, we're going to put that all together into one lesson, and we're just going to be multiplying integers together, sometimes 2, 3, maybe even 4 integers together. We're going to figure out a rule that will help you remember what the answer is as far as if it's going to be negative or positive. Okay, so let's look at this example. We have 6 times negative 4 times 2. Okay, so if we work this out together, again, like I said before, a lot of times just go from left to right. You don't have to do it that way, but that's the way I usually do it. 6 times negative 4 is negative 24. And then we're just going to drop the 2 down. Negative 24 times 2 is going to give you negative 48. Now what I want you to notice is how many negatives did we start out with? We started out with 1, okay, and our answer was negative. So keep that in mind because we're about to learn a rule. It's going to get you the right sign every time. All right, next we have 4 times negative 3. 4 times negative 3 times negative 2. Again, we'll just work from left to right. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And then we're just going to drop the negative 2 down. So it's negative 12 times negative 2, which is going to give you negative times a negative is a positive 24. And again, what I want you to think about is we started out with 2 negatives this time. The answer was positive. And I'll even put the positive next to 24. So we're starting to kind of see maybe what kind of general rule we can use to figure out if our answer is going to be negative or positive. In this case, we have a negative 9 times negative 2 times negative 3 times 1. In this case, I'm going to multiply the negative 9 times the negative 2, and then I'm going to multiply the negative 3 times the 1 and multiply those two answers together. Negative 9 times negative 2 is positive 18, and then negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. So now all I have to do is 18 times negative 3, which if we work that out, a positive times a negative is negative. That glitched on me. Positive times a negative is a negative, so the answer is negative 54. Again, we're just putting in previous lessons that we've learned already. Again, though, what I want you to think about is we started out with 3 negatives this time, and we ended up with a negative. Okay, last time we started with 2, it was positive. First time we started out with 1, and it was negative. Let's do one more example. We have a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative. Okay, so we have 4 total negatives. Again, we're going to do the same method as before. Multiply the first 2 together. Negative times a negative is a positive 12. Then we're going to multiply the next 2 together. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. And again, the reason we can do this because the order in which you multiply does not matter for integers or any other real numbers. All right, so then we just do 12 times 2. And 12 times 2 is 24. And that's a positive. So notice this time we start out with 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. The answer was positive. So what's the trend? Well, when we had 2 negatives, we had a positive 24. Okay. And when we had 4 negatives, we had a positive 24. But when we had either 3 negatives, which was negative, we have 3 negatives, our answer was negative. When we had 1 negative, our answer was negative. Well, what do 1 and 3 have in common? They're both odd, right? And what do 2 and 4 have in common? They're both even. So here's the rule. If there are an even number of negative numbers that are multiplied, the answer will always be positive. Again, going back to this example, we had 4 negative numbers, and the answer was positive. And here we had 2 negative numbers, and the answer was positive. So if you have an even number of negative numbers, the answer will be positive. However, if you have an odd number of negative numbers that are multiplied, the answer will be negative. Again, going back to our previous examples, we had 3 negative numbers. The answer was negative, and 3 is an odd number. Or we had 1 negative number. The answer was negative, and 1 is an odd number. Okay, so even number of negatives is positive, and odd number of negatives is negative. Okay, so odd number of negatives is negative when you're multiplying. So let's apply that rule and do some examples together. So the thing is, you can just automatically look at a problem, since this only has one negative in it, the other two are positive. I know my answer is going to be negative, right? So I can put a negative down there. Then all I have to do is just do 8 times 7 times 2. Okay, so 8 times 7 is 56, times 2 is 112. So right off the bat, you can look at a problem and tell whether it's going to be negative or positive. The two steps are multiply and then place the positive or negative sign. And so in this case, we already knew it was going to be negative, so we can put our positive, we can put our negative sign in front of the 112 once we're done. Okay, so let's do another example together. 5 times negative 7 times negative 1. So the first step is going to be to multiply 5, 7, and 1. 5 times 7 is 35, times 1 is also 35. That's our first step. The next step is to basically count how many negatives we have. We have 2, which is an even number, so we're going to place the positive or negative sign there. Since we know it's 2 negatives, it's going to be positive. Our final step is to put the positive sign there. Notice you basically have to do it in one step, because otherwise if you forget the sign, your answer is going to be wrong. But since we have an even number of negative signs, we knew the answer was going to be positive. Final example, we have 12 times negative 4 times negative 2 times negative 1. So we're going to multiply these out. All right, so 12 times 4 is 48. And negative 2 times negative 1, or 2 times 1, we'll just do that, is 2. 48 times 2 is 96. That's the first step, but don't forget the next step. How many negatives do we have total? We're going back. We have 1, 2, 3. That's an odd number of negatives, so we know the answer is going to be negative 96. That's it for multiplying positives and negatives together. For the first step, I do have to apologize. I actually put the negative first and then put the answer second. What we should have done is, so we'll do this one again just to make sure. We have 8 times 7 times 2, which is 112. That's our first step, which is multiply. Then we will go ahead and place the positive or negative sign. And in this case, since there's only one negative, that's an odd number, we know the final answer is going to be negative. So that's it for multiplying positives and negatives together, or multiplying integers. If you have an even number of negative numbers, the answer is going to be positive. If you have an odd number of negative numbers, the answer is going to be negative. If you have any other questions about multiplying integers, let me know.